On my 29th birthday, I thought I'd be celebrating quietly, maybe ordering my favorite takeout and watching a movie alone in my apartment. I never expected my parents, Vance and Cora, to walk in without knocking, their faces cold and unreadable. They didn't greet me with happy birthday or a smile. Instead, they dropped a bank statement on the table, and my heart sank before I even looked at the numbers. $2.9 million. Gone. Every single dollar I had painstakingly saved over the years was gone, siphoned away to fund my sister Tatum's boutique hotel venture. They called it a family investment, their voices full of condescension, as if I should feel proud to be contributing to Tatum's dreams. I stayed silent. No tears, no anger, no outburst. On the outside, I looked calm, almost robotic. But inside, I felt a strange mix of disappointment and satisfaction. They had no idea that this moment, the one they probably thought would hurt me the most, was exactly what I had been waiting for. For over a decade, I had watched them favor Tatum, showering her with attention and resources, while I quietly built my own life, unnoticed and uncelebrated. I remembered childhood moments that stung. The time I won first place at the science fair, and my parents were too busy at Tatum's dance recital to show up, or the first loan my dad had taken from my part-time job at 16, never repaid. I had spent years learning to be invisible, learning to let my parents' selfishness slide while quietly securing my independence. And now, that independence was untouchable. While they prattled on about how Tatum needed this money to succeed, I let them talk. Each word confirmed what I already knew about them. Each gesture showed their greed. Unbeknownst to them, the account they emptied wasn't the one holding my real fortune. That one was safe, hidden, and untouchable, a fortress built from years of careful planning. As they left, satisfied with themselves, I finally allowed a small smile. The trap I had set, the one designed not out of malice, but to protect what was rightfully mine, had worked perfectly. They had revealed their true colors, and I had the proof I needed. In that moment, I realized that my 29th birthday wasn't about being celebrated. It was about seeing clearly, about recognizing who my family truly was, and more importantly, about knowing that I would never rely on them again. I sat down, sipped my coffee, and felt a calm sense of triumph. The birthday I thought would be ordinary had turned into the turning point I had been preparing for all my life. My parents had chosen to betray me, and in doing so, they had finally shown me the freedom I had been waiting to claim. When I was a child, my parents always treated Tatum like she could do no wrong. She was charming, artistic, and every little thing she did was celebrated. Birthdays, recitals, school performances, everything revolved around her. I tried to be happy for her, but it often felt like I didn't exist at all. I was different. Quiet, practical, careful. I did my homework on time, helped around the house, and saved my allowance, but my parents rarely noticed. I remember one science fair where I worked for weeks on my project, and I won first place. I was so proud, but my parents didn't come to see it. They were at Tatum's dance recital, cheering her on. I felt invisible, like my achievements didn't matter. Even small things were taken from me. When I got my first job at 16, I was careful with every dollar I earned. One day, my father asked me for money, saying he'd pay me back soon. I trusted him, as a child does, and gave it to him. Years later, it was clear that money was never coming back. It wasn't just the money. It was the way my family always put Tatum first and treated me like I was just there to help her shine. Growing up like that shaped me. I learned to watch and listen, to stay calm even when I felt hurt. I became reliable and practical, not because I wanted praise, but because I had to find my own strength. I quietly saved my money, planned my future, and made sure I could stand on my own. While my parents fawned over Tatum, I was learning to depend only on myself. Looking back, those years taught me more than I realized at the time. I learned patience, resilience, and how to protect myself without anyone noticing. I learned that being invisible in my family didn't mean I had no power. It just meant I had to find it on my own. Every act of kindness I gave, every hour I spent working on school projects or saving my allowance, was for me, not for anyone else. By the time I reached adulthood, I had built a quiet strength that my parents never recognized. I had everything I needed to succeed, even if they never saw it. Tatum would get all the attention, all the praise, and all the money. I would get something else: freedom, independence, and the chance to make my own path, away from the people who always treated me like I was invisible. Those early experiences made me who I am. I learned to watch the world carefully, to notice the patterns, and to understand that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who will underestimate you the most. I became the kind of person who could wait patiently, quietly building her life, while everyone else focused on someone else. And that patience would one day pay off in ways they never imagined. I worked hard in college, studying cybersecurity and finance, and I did well. I got top grades and earned awards, but my parents never seemed to notice. They acted as if my achievements were normal, unremarkable, while Tatum's smallest successes were celebrated loudly. I learned early that recognition from them would never come, no matter how much I accomplished. After graduation, I landed a high-paying job. It felt like a dream, but I kept my excitement quiet. My parents, as usual, had no interest in what I was doing. Instead, I watched them throw money at Tatum's life without a second thought. Her wedding was extravagant, every detail planned, every expense covered, and they didn't blink. I realized then that no matter how successful I became, they would never see me the way they saw Tatum. That was the moment I understood something important. My money, my achievements, my independence, these were the only things I could truly control. I didn't need their approval or recognition, but I needed security. I needed freedom that couldn't be taken from me. From that day, I decided to live differently. I started living frugally, keeping my lifestyle modest and unnoticeable. No one in my family knew how much I was earning. I saved quietly, carefully, and planned every step. At the same time, I opened a hidden, secure account, separate from anything my parents or Tatum could find. Slowly, over months and years, I built a real fortune, one that was mine alone. It wasn't just money. It was freedom, independence, and a shield against being overlooked or used again. I also became careful about how I interacted with my parents. I kept things polite but distant. I let them believe I was just the quiet, practical daughter they had always dismissed. I smiled when they talked about Tatum's successes and nodded politely when they asked about my work, knowing that my real life, the life they would never touch, was building quietly behind the scenes. Living this double life gave me a sense of control I had never had before. My parents could continue ignoring me, but it didn't matter. I was creating my own path, my own future, one step at a time. I knew that one day, the independence I was building would be more powerful than anything they could take from me. By the time I had saved enough, I was no longer just the invisible daughter. I was someone who could make choices without needing anyone's permission, someone who had a safety net no one else knew about. That secret, my hidden fortune, became my power. It gave me confidence, freedom, and the knowledge that I could finally live life on my own terms, far from the favoritism and indifference that had shaped my childhood. Every dollar I saved was more than money. It was proof that I could protect myself, that I could build a life for me alone, and that finally I was in control. I knew I had to be careful. I couldn't just keep all my money in one place and hope no one would try to take it. So, I decided to create a decoy account, one that looked real enough to trick anyone who was snooping but wasn't connected to my true savings. I carefully planned every detail. I added just enough money to make it believable. The deposits mirrored the way I had been saving in my real accounts, so it looked like any normal savings pattern. I even made sure it seemed like money I had been collecting for years. It had to be convincing, or my parents would never take the bait. At the same time, I made it slightly vulnerable, leaving small clues that someone like my father, who barely understood technology, might notice and try to access. To make the decoy more believable, I linked it to an old address, somewhere they thought I still used. I didn't want them to suspect anything, so every little detail had to look natural. The account had weaker security on purpose, enough that they could find it, but not enough to give them access to my real fortune. It was like setting a trap, and every piece had to be perfect. I didn't take any chances with the legal side either. I spoke to a lawyer in private and explained the plan carefully. Together, we drafted documents and instructions for what should happen if anyone ever tampered with the account. I wanted to make sure that if my parents touched it, they would trigger the rules I had already set up. That way, even their mistakes would work in my favor. Every step was methodical. I thought about what they would do, how they might react, and how to make the decoy irresistible without risking my real savings. I wanted to be sure they would see the money and feel confident that they could use it. It had to be tempting enough to make them act without asking, without thinking about the consequences. While setting this up, I stayed calm, patient, and deliberate. I knew the decoy had to survive for years if needed, so I made sure it looked normal in every way. Deposits, withdrawals, account statements. Everything mimicked a real, active account. I even left small, innocent-looking financial notes in places where my parents might see them, just to guide them toward it. By the time I finished, the trap was ready. My parents could not resist it. They would think they had found my entire fortune, but in reality, it was all an illusion. I had built a safe cage around my true wealth, carefully protecting it while letting them believe they had the upper hand. Every step was calculated, and every detail was meant to ensure that when the moment came, they would fall right into it without ever suspecting I had been in control all along. It felt powerful to know that I had created this safety net, this clever setup that would finally protect me from the people who had ignored and underestimated me for so long. The cage was ready, and now all I had to do was wait. When the decoy account was fully prepared, I knew the next step was to guide my parents toward it without making it obvious. They had to believe they discovered it on their own. So during one visit to their house, I forgot a financial document on the dining table. It looked harmless, just a printed page showing the decoy account's balance and a few recent deposits. I placed it where I knew my mother would notice it the moment she cleaned up after dinner. I didn't rush out or act nervous. I simply picked up my bag, hugged them goodbye, and left the paper behind as if it slipped out accidentally. I knew they would study it as soon as I walked out the door. That was exactly what I wanted. A week later, I visited them again and added another small push. While sipping tea in the living room, I casually complained about how stressful it was managing my life savings. I didn't sound worried. I sounded tired, as if money was a burden instead of something I guarded carefully. I knew they were already thinking about the document they found, and now I was feeding that thought without being direct. I also made sure to bring up Tatum's financial struggle. I didn't ask them to help her. I only mentioned hearing that her plans weren't going well. I knew the moment I said her name, their attention sharpened. They had always cared more about fixing her problems than anything else. The idea that I had money and she needed money was the perfect combination. After that conversation, I watched their behavior change. When I entered a room, they became quiet. When I mentioned anything related to work or my finances, they exchanged quick looks. Their whispers grew frequent, and they paused their conversations whenever I walked in. It was clear they had taken the bait. They believed the decoy account was my real savings. They believed I had no idea they knew about it. And they believed they were being clever by keeping their interest a secret from me. I didn't confront them or question their sudden curiosity. Instead, I watched with calm satisfaction. Every hushed conversation, every guilty glance told me the plan was working. They thought they were about to take something from me, but they didn't know that the account they were eyeing had been created for exactly this purpose. Their behavior confirmed everything I needed to know. They weren't thinking about my future or my hard work. They were thinking about Tatum and her needs, the same way they always had. Only now, they believed they had found a convenient solution, my savings. It was almost surreal watching them step deeper into the trap I had set so quietly. They thought they were being smart, but the truth was simple. They were reacting exactly the way I knew they would. Their greed guided them, and all I had to do was wait. The morning after my birthday felt strangely peaceful. My apartment was completely silent, and the only sound was the soft clink of my spoon against my coffee cup. I sat there for a moment, taking in the quiet. There was no anger left in me, no shock, no sadness. Everything that had happened the night before had only confirmed what I already knew would happen. After finishing a few slow sips, I set my cup down and opened my laptop. My hands did not shake. I went straight to my email, opened a draft I had written months earlier, and typed one word: proceed. Then I clicked send. The message went to my lawyer, who already knew what steps to take from there. With that done, I logged into my real financial accounts. These were the accounts no one knew about, secure, hidden, protected by layers of digital walls I had built myself. My heart didn't race as I looked at the numbers. Everything was still there. The full $2.9 million and more, untouched and completely safe. Nothing my parents had done had reached the real money. The decoy had fooled them exactly the way I expected. I took a deep breath, feeling a calmness fill my chest. It was time for the next part. I opened another tab and began canceling every automatic payment I had been covering for years. One by one, I removed myself from their lives financially. First the mortgage payment gone. Then the car payment removed. Insurance, utilities, small monthly bills they never even knew I paid. I had done these things quietly out of habit and duty, but now it was time to stop. I didn't do it out of revenge. I did it because they had made their choice. By taking what they thought was my entire life savings, they showed me where I stood in their eyes. I wasn't their daughter. I was their solution, their backup plan, their wallet. And I refused to play that role any longer. I kept clicking through each account, each subscription, each bill. With every cancellation, the weight on my shoulders grew lighter. It felt like cutting ropes that had held me down for years. For the first time, I felt truly free. When everything was done, I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. The apartment was still quiet, still calm. But now the silence felt different, more like a fresh start than an empty room. The trap had sprung shut. They had taken the bait. And I had taken back my life. The next day, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I answered, I heard my father's panicked voice. His words rushed out in a jumble. The bank had frozen the account they had emptied. Even worse, a federal fraud investigation had been opened. The massive withdrawal from an account that had always shown small, steady deposits looked suspicious to the authorities. He was frantic, trying to explain, to reason, to plead. In the background, I could hear my mother screaming. Her voice was sharp and high, filled with anger and fear. She accused me of setting them up, of planning this from the start. Every word was laced with panic and guilt. It was loud, chaotic, and full of the desperation they had always tried to hide. I stayed calm. My heart beat normally, and my voice was steady when I spoke. I didn't defend myself. I didn't get angry. I let them unravel on their own, just as I had planned. When my father asked if I had done this, I feigned ignorance. I sounded puzzled, concerned even, like I had no idea what he was talking about. I suggested, in a soft but firm tone, that they should lawyer up. I didn't say it as a threat. I said it as a piece of practical advice. They needed help, and I would not be the one to guide them. Every second of their panic felt like confirmation that the plan had worked perfectly. They didn't understand that the account they had emptied wasn't my real savings at all. They had triggered the very system I had set up to protect myself. I listened quietly as they shouted, argued, and tried to figure out what had gone wrong. My father's voice cracked with frustration. My mother's accusations grew louder and more frantic. It was almost like watching a slow-motion collapse. Everything they had assumed about me, about my money, about their control, was crumbling. I didn't intervene. I didn't explain. I simply let them experience the consequences of their choices. Even though they were terrified, I remained collected. There was no fear in my chest, no regret. Only quiet satisfaction. They had been careless, greedy, and short-sighted, and now they were facing the results. As the call ended, I leaned back and exhaled. Their panic, their confusion, their anger. It all confirmed what I already knew. I had finally set boundaries they could not cross, and I had done it without ever raising my voice or showing them my hand. For the first time in years, they were powerless over me. And I felt an unshakable calm, knowing that no matter what they did next, my life, my money, and my freedom were completely beyond their reach. The fallout hit my parents harder than I had imagined. The bank's freeze on the decoy account triggered a chain reaction that neither of them could control. Their own money, tangled up in the investigation, was suddenly inaccessible. Every asset they had tied to the account was frozen, leaving them scrambling to figure out how to pay their bills and keep their lifestyle intact. Tatum's hotel deal, which had been their main reason for taking my money, collapsed almost immediately. The investors pulled out after hearing about the account freeze and the ongoing fraud investigation. It was a disaster that they could not fix, no matter how many phone calls or frantic meetings they arranged. Their dreams of a luxurious hotel vanished, leaving them angry, desperate, and powerless. Meanwhile, the regular bills I had been quietly covering were no longer being paid. Mortgage, car insurance, utilities, all of it stopped. Their home, which they had always taken for granted, was now at risk of foreclosure. They had assumed that my money would always cover their mistakes, but the truth hit them like a wave. Without me, their financial security crumbled. The situation became public quickly. A local news segment ran a story about affluent financial misconduct, highlighting the frozen accounts and suspicious transactions. My parents' names were mentioned, and their faces appeared on television. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues learned about their involvement, and the shame of public exposure was immediate. They had always cared about appearances, and now everyone could see the results of their choices. Through it all, I stayed out of the chaos. I didn't gloat or celebrate. I simply watched from a distance, knowing that the consequences were the natural outcome of their actions. They had chosen greed over fairness, Tatum over me, and shortcuts over responsibility. Now they were facing the reality of those choices. The lesson was clear, not just for them but for me. I had built my life in a way that could never be taken from me. Their collapse proved that financial independence and careful planning were more powerful than favoritism or manipulation. I didn't need revenge to feel victorious. Their downfall was a direct result of their own decisions, and that was enough. For the first time, they understood the cost of their actions, and I finally felt the quiet relief of knowing I was no longer bound by their control. I had protected myself, secured my future, and let the consequences speak for themselves. A few days after the news hit, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I saw my mother standing there, completely disheveled. Her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled, and her face pale and anxious. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with wide, pleading eyes. Then her voice broke as she started begging. "Please, Sloan, you have to fix this. You have to tell the authorities it was a mistake. We're family," she said, her words rushing out in a panic jumble. She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "You're destroying us. Tatum is devastated. Think about her. Please, I'm begging you." She repeated it over and over, switching from tears to frustration, trying every tactic she could think of. She reminded me of all the family memories, all the times we had been together, and tried to pull at every string she thought might work. But nothing she said moved me. I had prepared for this. I had imagined this confrontation many times, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I stood still, calm, and silent for a moment, letting her words sink in. Then I looked her straight in the eyes. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't show anger. My voice was steady, almost soft, as I spoke. "You didn't just take my money," I said. "You confirmed I was never your daughter. Just your ATM." Her face changed instantly. The pleading turned into shock, then into disbelief. She opened her mouth to respond, but I stayed silent, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. She couldn't argue with the truth. All the guilt, all the anger, all the panic, none of it changed the reality she had created. I didn't need to shout or punish her. Her panic, her desperation, and her shame were punishment enough. I could see it in her eyes. She realized that I was no longer the daughter who would quietly give in, the daughter who would sacrifice herself for Tatum's life or their comfort. I had drawn a line, and this time she couldn't cross it. After a long moment, she finally turned and walked away, shoulders slumped and tears streaming down her face. I closed the door quietly behind her and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction in her pain. I felt calm. I had finally set boundaries, claimed my independence, and made it clear that I would no longer be used or overlooked. That confrontation, as desperate and messy as it was, marked the end of their control over me. I had faced them, told them the truth they couldn't deny, and stood my ground. For the first time, I truly felt free, knowing that no amount of begging, guilt, or manipulation could take that away. I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, the city spread out below me. The space was bright and modern, exactly the way I had imagined it when I first started saving quietly years ago. Everything here was mine, bought with my real savings, untouched by anyone else, a life I had built entirely on my own. The air felt lighter somehow, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed a letter slipped under the door. It was from Tatum. My heart skipped for a moment as I carefully opened it. She didn't ask for money or help, which surprised me. Instead, she wrote about finally seeing how our parents had always treated us differently, about how she had been favored all her life while I had been overlooked. For the first time, she acknowledged the truth and expressed a desire to rebuild a real relationship with me, one that wasn't controlled by our parents or their expectations. Reading her words, I felt a warmth I hadn't expected. I realized that my actions hadn't been about revenge or hurting anyone. They had been about freeing myself. Every step I had taken, from quietly saving my money, to creating the decoy account, to standing firm when my parents begged, had been about claiming control over my life. I had finally broken the pattern of being invisible, the dependable one always giving and never receiving recognition. I looked out at the city again and let myself reflect. I had worked hard, stayed patient, and protected myself without stooping to spite. My parents' choices had revealed who they truly were, and I had used that knowledge to create boundaries I would never cross. But the real victory wasn't in their failure or shame. It was in the life I had built for myself. For the first time, I felt fully visible to myself. Every achievement, every dollar saved, every careful decision had brought me here. I was no longer just a backup plan, a helper, or an invisible presence in my family. I was someone who mattered, someone capable of building her own future. Holding Tatum's letter in my hands, I smiled quietly. The life I had fought for, the independence I had worked so hard to secure, was finally mine. I was free, I was seen, and I had finally created a life entirely on my own terms.